She had always believed she could read the world like a book. Every street, every face, every fleeting shadow carried a story, a hint, a warning. But that morning something was off. She didn't know it yet, of course. She never did, not until the moment that truth hits like a storm breaking through the calm. She walked along the cobblestone streets of the city, the early sun spilling gold across the pavements, brushing over the rooftops and glinting in the windows. Birds chirped softly somewhere above the skyline, a delicate soundtrack to the mundane rhythm of life. People passed by, heads down, coffee in hand, smiles fleeting and tired. Life felt ordinary, harmless even. She breathed it in, the cool, crisp air that carried the faint scent of rain from the night before, mixed with the warmth of fresh bread from the bakery down the street. There was a comforting sense of normalcy, a quiet promise that today would be like any other. And yet, a shadow brushed the corner of her vision. Not hers. Not a trick of the light. A shadow that moved too deliberately, too purposefully, like it belonged to someone who knew exactly where she would be, exactly when she would be. Her heart didn't jump. Not yet. She paused at the crosswalk, one hand gripping the strap of her bag, the other brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. There was a rhythm to her breathing, steady, calm, practiced. But even in that rhythm there was a whisper of unease. Something in the world felt wrong. A text beeped in her pocket. She pulled it out and read the words, and even though they seemed innocuous at first, her stomach knotted anyway. Be careful. Someone's watching. A shiver crawled up her spine. She glanced over her shoulder. Nothing. Just the city stretching behind her, just the soft murmur of people going about their lives. And yet she couldn't shake the feeling. Not the way she never shook the feeling when the air smelled too sweet before a storm, when the trees bent in a way that seemed almost purposeful, like they were leaning in to warn her. She smiled to herself, a small self-conscious twitch. Paranoia. That's all it was. She always worried too much. She'd been told that by friends, by coworkers, even by strangers on the train. But instinct doesn't lie. And yet, right now, as she stepped onto the small bridge over the river and watched the sunlight glitter across the rippling water, she allowed herself a moment of ease. The warmth of the sun on her skin, the soft hum of distant traffic, the gentle sway of the trees, she let it all settle her. Because tomorrow would be dangerous. But today felt safe. At least that was what she told herself. Footsteps. Just one. Then another. Not matching the rhythm of the bustling city around her. Slower, deliberate, careful. But when she turned sharply, just for a second, the street behind her seemed empty. Nothing but the usual blur of morning commuters. Her heartbeat quickened, a subtle drum in her chest that made her feel alive. Or maybe that was fear. Maybe they were the same thing, tangled together like two threads she couldn't separate. The gentle wind carried a whisper, something she almost imagined rather than heard. A voice. A warning. She tightened her grip on her bag, instinct telling her to move faster, but curiosity kept her rooted. There's a danger in curiosity, she knew that. It's a lure. But it's also the thing that makes life worth noticing, worth feeling, worth surviving. And then, as she reached for the railing of the bridge to steady herself, she noticed it. A flicker in the reflection on the water. A figure. Just for a heartbeat, just a whisper of a shadow against the sun-dappled surface. But it was enough. Enough to make her skin prickle, to make her pulse catch in her throat. She wasn't alone. She had never been alone. And in that moment, something deep and instinctual stirred within her. A blend of fear and anticipation, warning and desire, an unnameable pull she couldn't yet understand. She sighed softly, shaking her head as though shaking off the feeling would make it go away. People would think she was imagining it, overreacting. She could almost hear them. Relax. It's just the city. You're just tired. You're always tired. But her instincts, they never lied. And that's when she noticed it. The way the air shifted almost imperceptibly, like it had weight, like it was holding its breath. And then it came. The faintest trace of movement behind the nearby tree line. Not a person, not exactly. Something else. Something that shouldn't be there but undeniably was. The hairs on the back of her neck rose. Her breath caught, shallow and quick, and her heart leapt, an erratic, impatient rhythm that made her feel every inch of her body alive. She could feel it in her bones, the warning, the primal call of something ancient brushing against the edges of the mundane world she thought she knew. She turned fully now, eyes scanning the street. The city was still calm, still ordinary. A jogger passed, a mother with a stroller laughed at some joke. The bakery's door chimed as another customer entered. But beneath all that ordinary life, the undercurrent remained. Danger. Watching. Waiting. And for reasons she couldn't yet name, her pulse didn't quicken with terror. No. It thrummed with something more complicated. Excitement, dread, and a strange magnetic pull toward what she knew she shouldn't. She took a step forward, almost unconsciously, drawn toward the unknown, drawn toward the life that was about to collide with hers. Her fingers brushed the smooth metal of the railing, grounding herself, but even that felt inadequate. Because the moment she moved, the world shifted slightly, as though holding its breath, as though aware of her next step, aware of the collision of fates that had begun without her knowing it. And then the wind carried another whisper, not quite audible, not quite understandable, but unmistakably directed at her. Not everything is what it seems. Be ready. A chill ran down her spine. She swallowed, her mouth dry, yet in that instant she felt completely alive. Completely vulnerable. Completely human. And completely, irrevocably caught in the eye of a storm she couldn't see, couldn't predict, but would soon understand in ways that would change her forever. She didn't know it yet, but today, on this calm, ordinary morning, her life had already begun to fracture. The shadow she thought was nothing would become everything. The whisper she thought was imagined would become reality. And the calm, the fragile, fleeting calm, would never return. Her name was Lila. She carried it softly, as if even her own voice could betray her vulnerability. She was 26, not young enough to be reckless, not old enough to be hardened by the world. Her life had been stitched together by careful choices and quiet compromises. She worked as an interior designer in a small upscale firm tucked into the heart of the city. She had talent, undeniable skill, but even success couldn't erase the shadows that lingered from her childhood. Shadows of neglect, fleeting love, promises broken, and moments when the people she should have been able to trust most had vanished like smoke. Her apartment was small but bright, every corner a reflection of her sense of order, a place where she could control what the world outside refused to guarantee. Each morning she moved through her routine with deliberate care. The soft hum of the shower, the faint scent of vanilla from the candle she always lit, the steam curling from her mug of coffee. Yet even in this calm her mind wandered, circling memories she could not quite shake. A father who disappeared before she learned to walk. A mother who offered love in short, fleeting bursts, as if affection was a finite resource to be rationed. That absence had carved a hollow inside her, one she filled with ambition, with dreams, with relationships she hoped could hold her together. She was kind, endlessly so. Sometimes painfully so. She gave freely, even when she had little to give, and believed, stubbornly, that her loyalty could anchor people as surely as it anchored her. It had worked some of the time, but often, it left her exposed. Slightly naive, yes, but not without awareness. She noticed the small things, the way people looked at her, the hesitation in their words, the moments they paused too long before speaking. She had learned to read those signs, though it never made the betrayals hurt less. Lila wanted the ordinary things most people took for granted. Love that didn't demand war, stability that didn't teeter on the edge of chaos, a sense of belonging so solid she wouldn't have to prove herself every single day. Those were not outrageous desires. Yet the world had a way of complicating even the simplest dreams. Trust was hard for her. She longed for companionship, but the fear of being abandoned was a constant whisper in the back of her mind. Sometimes it made her retreat. Sometimes it made her chase too quickly, desperate to secure what might not even exist. Her days were structured but never sterile. At work, she moved with quiet confidence, her designs precise, her eye for detail sharp. Clients adored her, co-workers respected her, and yet the small moments of human connection were fleeting. A shared laugh over a messy coffee spill, a knowing glance when a particularly stubborn project came through. These little sparks mattered more than she would admit. When the office emptied and the hum of the city outside her window became louder than her own heartbeat, she sometimes lingered at her desk, staring at a half-finished design, thinking about how little control she truly had over the world. How fragile the moments of happiness were. Evenings were a mix of solitude and quiet routines. She cooked simple meals, poured herself a glass of wine she didn't always drink, and sat on the balcony watching the city breathe. Lights flickered on in other apartments, Families moved through dinner routines, couples laughed in muted apartments across the street. She envied the ease of it, envied the certainty that people seemed to carry naturally. Lila carried her uncertainty like a shadow, her loneliness wrapped in quiet dignity. And yet, beneath that loneliness, there was resilience. She had survived losses that could have broken someone weaker. She had endured betrayals that left scars invisible to the eye. And despite everything, she hoped. So she hoped. And then he appeared. Not literally, not like a storm rolling in, but quietly, subtly, like the first crack of sunlight through clouds heavy with rain. Julian. Tall, impossibly composed, with a presence that seemed to bend the room to his will. People noticed him instinctively even before she did. But Lila didn't notice. She only felt it, the pull. Something unexplainable that nudged her closer, whispered at the edges of her mind, coaxed her heart to beat faster without reason. Julian was a mystery wrapped in a calm exterior. He moved through life with a confidence that bordered on arrogance, but there was something more. Beneath the sharp suits and tailored perfection, there was a warmth that seemed real. He noticed the little things. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was nervous. The way she paused just slightly before making a decision. And when he spoke, his voice was a low, comforting timbre, like someone had smoothed the rough edges of the world just for her. Life with Julian felt safe. Not the kind of safety that cages you, but a warmth that seemed to hold her steady, to remind her that the world was not only harsh and unpredictable. There were dinners at quiet restaurants, evenings filled with conversation that stretched long into the night, walks through parks where the city melted away, and in those moments, Lila felt the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, she could let herself trust again. But nothing is ever as simple as it seems. Julian's life was carefully orchestrated, every gesture, every word meticulously controlled. At first, Lila thought it was charm, the effortless ease of someone who had always gotten what they wanted. But subtle warnings began to flicker at the edges of her awareness. There was the way he managed every detail of their meetings, the way he seemed to know where she would be before she even decided. The way his attention was both comforting and overwhelming, a magnetic pull she couldn't resist even as it unsettled her. And she felt it, the growing dependency. Not sudden, not dramatic, but slow, like water eroding stone. She found herself waiting for his texts, her heart lifting when he appeared, her body relaxing only in his presence. Outside his orbit, life felt incomplete, uneasy. A gnawing sense of vulnerability she hadn't noticed before. She dismissed it. Love, she told herself, always comes with adjustments. It doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. Yet even in those moments of bliss, small, almost imperceptible signs hinted at danger. The way he glanced at her phone, not maliciously, but with an intensity that made her skin crawl. The way his presence seemed to command attention, bending the environment around him, making her feel both protected and confined. And she couldn't shake the sense that beneath that perfection, beneath the safety and charm, something was withheld. Something that, if revealed, could undo everything. Even so, Lila was drawn deeper. She wanted to believe in the security he offered, in the life that seemed perfect when he was near. She wanted to believe in the warmth, the stability, the fragile hope he stirred inside her. And the more she allowed herself to sink into it, the more she ignored the subtle dissonance that tingled at her nerves, the faint unease she couldn't explain. Because in the presence of Julian, danger and desire, safety and suspicion, fear and longing all blurred. And Lila, for the first time in a long while, let herself hope. But the audience knows, even as she breathes that hope in deeply, that this calm, this illusion of perfection, is a fragile thing. Every laugh, every touch, every shared glance is layered with tension she cannot yet perceive. Every heartbeat in her chest, every shiver when he brushes against her hand, is a step toward a storm she cannot yet see. The signs are there, subtle and unrelenting. Control wrapped in comfort, charm intertwined with shadow, love wrapped around a secret that will soon fracture her world. And so the audience waits with her, knowing what she cannot, that the safety she clings to so desperately is only the calm before the storm, the fragile veneer over a truth so dangerous, so intimate, that when it finally breaks, it will not only challenge her heart, it will challenge everything she thought she knew about love, trust, and the man she has begun to let inside her world. Days turned into nights, and nights blurred into the quiet hum of the city that never truly slept. Lila felt a strange comfort in the rhythm of her new reality. Walks with Julian through streets glimmering with streetlights, the occasional gust of wind carrying the scent of rain-soaked asphalt, and the murmur of life from the windows she passed. He had a way of noticing everything about her, the small habitual gestures that made her unique and somehow, that made her feel less like a lone soul drifting through life and more like someone worth noticing, worth protecting. They talked endlessly, sometimes about nothing, sometimes about everything. Julian asked questions that dug deeper than most dared to go. Questions about her dreams, the ones she had kept carefully hidden even from herself. At first she hesitated, her chest tightening as though opening up could somehow break her. But his voice, it was calm, grounding, the kind of sound that could steady trembling hands and racing thoughts. She told him things she had never spoken aloud. The fear that one day she would be abandoned again, the lingering sting of childhood wounds, the quiet ache for belonging. And he listened. Not with polite nods or distracted attention, but with a presence that made her feel utterly seen. Each confession built an invisible thread between them, a tether she hadn't realized she was willing to tie so tightly. In those moments the world narrowed to just the two of them, his gaze steady and intense drawing her forward, her heartbeat loud and unguarded, the soft brush of his hand against hers, a silent promise that made her breath hitch. The intimacy of it was intoxicating, a slow-burning fire that warmed her from the inside, even as it awakened a nervous flutter in her chest. Friends noticed. Subtle glances, whispered questions, and a quiet admiration in the way they watched the two of them together. Some warned, cautious and concerned, their words carrying the faint tremor of premonition. Be careful, Lila. Sometimes what feels safe isn't. But she brushed it off. They didn't understand. They didn't feel the anchoring pull he had on her, the strange combination of excitement and calm, the way she felt simultaneously untouchable and entirely exposed when he was near. There were moments of laughter, too, light, infectious, the kind that made her stomach ache with happiness. He could make her laugh even in the moments when her own mind felt heavy with memories she couldn't shake. They shared dreams, imagined futures together in soft conversations late into the night, their voices low, intimate, almost conspiratorial. She dared to hope, allowed herself to dream of a life that didn't feel fragile, that didn't teeter on the edge of loss at every turn. But with that hope came the smallest prickles of doubt, subtle cues she tried to ignore. A glance that lingered too long, a question he deflected, a hand brushing hers with an intensity that felt almost like ownership. She felt safe in his presence more than she had in years. And yet, there was a whisper of unease at the edges of her consciousness. A shadow she couldn't name, a tension she couldn't untangle. She pushed it down, telling herself it was nothing. Trust, she reminded herself, was a risk worth taking. Vulnerability was a risk, yes, but it was also the only way to know real connection. And Julian made her feel alive in a way that nothing else ever had. But the audience, unlike Lila, begins to notice the inconsistencies, the small cracks hidden beneath Julian's polished exterior. He was always careful, deliberate, measured, but even careful people have secrets. They notice the way he pauses when asked about his family, the subtle hesitation in his voice, the fleeting shadow that crosses his expression when certain topics arise. They see the way he seems to know far more about her world than he should, the way he subtly manipulates circumstances to keep her close, to ensure she stays anchored to him. The first hint is almost imperceptible. A comment he makes in passing about a distant relative or a family connection, phrased so casually it could be overlooked. A glance that lingers just a fraction too long, scanning her reaction. Small, almost harmless gestures that, when pieced together, form a pattern of hidden intent. The audience begins to understand something she cannot. Julian is not just the charming protector he appears to be. He is entwined in her life in ways she cannot yet imagine. Every tender moment, every shared dream, now carries a tension beneath it that Lila cannot perceive. When he laughs, it is warm and real, yet the audience notes the flicker of calculation behind it. When he touches her hand, grounding and comforting as it feels, there is also the weight of unspoken authority, the subtle hint of a man used to commanding and controlling outcomes. The very things that make her feel safe, the strength in his gaze, the certainty in his words, also carry the faintest trace of danger. Her friends begin to voice their concern more forcefully, though she dismisses them. I don't know, Lila. Something feels off. You deserve someone who doesn't make you second-guess yourself. She smiles, reassured by Julian's steady presence beside her, his hand over hers, his voice low and calming. "I've got you. Always." And she believes him. She wants to believe him. The pull of hope is stronger than the whisper of doubt. Yet the suspense lingers. The audience is aware of Julian's secret, one that will unravel everything she believes in. He is not merely the mysterious, protective figure she adores. He is bound to her life in ways that will soon force her to question every choice, every feeling, every word of trust she has offered. Every shared glance, every soft laugh, every tender moment between them is layered now with dramatic irony, tension that the audience can feel vibrating in the air, like a low hum of electricity before a storm breaks. Even as Lila sleeps, comforted by his presence in the apartment they share for the night, there is a subtle unease in the air. The city outside is quiet but watchful, the soft hum of distant traffic, the whisper of the wind through the trees, the faint creak of floorboards, all ordinary, yet somehow laden with anticipation. Julian sits across the room, reading, calm, composed, and yet, the audience senses the weight of what he hides. A truth he cannot share yet, a secret that will fracture her world when it is finally revealed. And in the quiet moments when she closes her eyes, curling into the warmth of his shoulder, there is a tension she cannot name. It's not fear exactly. It's the subtle, instinctual pull of danger she cannot yet perceive, the primal undercurrent that warns. The life you hold so dearly, the man you trust implicitly, is not what it seems. Every heartbeat, every breath she takes in these moments of intimacy, carries the invisible weight of impending revelation, the fragile suspense of a life balanced on the knife edge between love and betrayal. She dreams lightly of laughter, of joy, of a life she has allowed herself to imagine. But the audience knows the truth hiding beneath those dreams, threading through the quiet intimacy, the shared smiles, the warmth of his hand in hers. Julian's secret waits like a predator at the edge of the forest, silent, patient, inevitable. And with every passing moment, every conversation, every touch, every heartbeat shared between them, the bond tightens further, weaving trust and desire into a fragile latticework that is about to be shattered. Lila's world feels safe, feels perfect. And yet, the faintest flicker of unease whispers in her mind, the trace of instinct she refuses to hear. The calm, the warmth, the hope, they are all a delicate illusion. The audience knows that love, in its most intense and dangerous form, is not always enough to protect you from the truths you cannot yet see. Every heartbeat, every breath, every quiet smile is a step closer to the revelation that will change everything. Life with Julian had become a rhythm she didn't entirely notice until she tried to step outside it. Each day was carefully choreographed. Laughter over breakfast, quiet walks through sunlit streets, afternoons filled with errands he somehow anticipated, dinners at restaurants he had already chosen. Gifts arrived without occasion, books she'd mentioned months ago, flowers in her favorite shades, delicate scarves that smelled faintly of cedar and something warm she couldn't name. She accepted them with a soft, grateful smile, and each gift wrapped her tighter in his orbit, tightening a web she didn't even realize she was tangled in. She felt safe. More than she had in years. When Julian was near, danger seemed to shrink into the corners of the world. Traffic, city noise, fleeting shadows, they all felt distant, irrelevant. And yet, that safety came with invisible chains. She noticed small things she tried to ignore. The way he subtly guided her decisions, framing choices as if she had agency while steering her inevitably toward the outcome he desired. He questioned her plans in gentle tones that never felt accusatory, yet each word nudged her closer to compliance. At first it was almost comforting. Someone else's direction, someone else's certainty. It felt good to be guided, to let go of the constant tension of decision-making, to let herself lean into the assurance of another mind. But a part of her, faint and hesitant, noticed the tightening of the leash. Her independence, which she had guarded so fiercely, began to shrink imperceptibly. She brushed it off, telling herself, "He's just protective. He cares. That's why he does this." And he did care in ways she couldn't deny. Each small act, a warm hand on her shoulder, a whispered word of reassurance, a carefully timed embrace, made her trust him more, lean into him more. The paradox gnawed at her. The same hands that protected her also controlled her. She felt trapped in the warmth of his care, bound by the very gestures that made her heart flutter. In quiet moments, when she closed her eyes and felt his presence beside her, she would tell herself that it didn't matter. That love sometimes meant surrender. That perhaps surrender wasn't weakness, it was belonging. Julian never pressured. Not overtly. He allowed her illusions of choice, carefully preserved the belief that she could decide, while steering her inevitably toward the outcomes he deemed necessary. "I'm only trying to protect you," he would say, his voice soft, unwavering. And in that voice Lila found solace, letting the rational part of her mind fall silent. She clung to it even as subtle warnings teased the edges of her consciousness. A fleeting discomfort when he brushed against her arm, a shadow of hesitation when he spoke of future plans, a small pang of unease when she realized she was measuring her own desires against his expectations. Even so, hope threaded through her confusion. She imagined that perhaps all of this, his guidance, his meticulous care, was love in its purest form. The tension inside her became a complex mix of fear and comfort, longing and doubt, desire and subtle dread. And as she surrendered just a little to the rhythm he created, the audience senses the invisible chains tightening, feeling the emotional dependency deepen with each passing day. Behind Julian's composed exterior, the internal storm raged. He justified every carefully orchestrated action as necessary for her safety, rationalized each manipulation as destiny unfolding in the way it should. In private, when no one was watching, he wrestled with the weight of his secret, the truth that could unravel everything. Every smile he gave her, every gentle gesture, carried the undercurrent of his fear. He feared losing her, feared that the revelation of who he truly was would shatter the fragile trust she had placed in him. And so he deceived, he guided, he controlled, all in the name of love. Yet he was painfully aware of the line he walked. The audience feels it in his moments of quiet reflection. The way he stares at her sleeping, the subtle tightening of his jaw when he imagines her reaction to the truth, the faint tremor in his hands when he writes a message he knows she will read. He believes in the righteousness of his actions, and yet, every decision carries the weight of potential destruction. The love he feels is genuine, yet it is intertwined irrevocably with the lies he must keep. Small acts of kindness, the soft cup of tea in the morning, the gentle hand on her shoulder, the comforting presence in moments of anxiety, contrast sharply with the deception that underlies every gesture. The audience sees the duality clearly. He is both savior and captor, protector and manipulator, lover and secret holder. Lila, blissfully unaware, grows increasingly dependent, her world narrowing around him, her identity entwined with his approval and presence. And she notices only what he allows her to notice. A look of reassurance when doubt surfaces. A carefully timed word to calm her fears. A laugh shared in the quiet of their apartment. Every tender moment is genuine enough to soothe her instincts, strong enough to make her feel cherished. And yet the audience knows the trap hidden beneath. Each gift, each whispered promise of safety, each carefully constructed scenario, everything binds her closer to him, tightening the control he wields under the guise of love. Julian's moral conflict intensifies with every interaction. He knows the line between love and possession is thin, and he walks it with careful calculation. His thoughts are restless at night, circling the consequences of revealing too much, the risk of pushing her away if he shows even a fraction of the truth. But he also fears the alternative, losing her completely, allowing her to drift back into a world that would never understand her, never protect her, never value her as he does. And in that fear, in that desperate rationalization, he convinces himself that the deception is justified, that the manipulation is a necessary cruelty, that the love he feels is pure even when the means are not. The tension between Lila's growing trust and Julian's concealed motives is palpable. Every touch, every glance, every word of comfort carries a dual meaning, creating a constant, simmering anxiety beneath the surface of their seemingly perfect connection. The audience feels it. The thrill, the unease, the electric charge of knowing more than the protagonist does. Every heartbeat she spends leaning into him is a heartbeat closer to the revelation that will irrevocably alter their world. In private, he sometimes allows himself moments of raw vulnerability, brief glimpses of the man beneath the polished exterior. In those moments he is haunted by guilt, by fear, by a fierce, unrelenting love that refuses to allow him to step back. The contrast between these private struggles and the controlled, composed lover he presents to Lila creates a magnetic tension. The audience is drawn deeper, caught in the moral and emotional turbulence swirling between them. And so their world continues to spin on this delicate axis. Love intertwined with control, trust entwined with deception, safety entwined with danger. Lila leans into him, feeling cherished, protected, and unaware of the shadow lurking behind the warmth. Julian, while desperate to preserve her trust, is bound by the weight of his secret, trapped between desire and honesty, love and manipulation. Every shared smile, every whispered word, every tender embrace is layered with tension, charged with the knowledge that the illusion they both participate in can shatter in an instant. The audience holds its breath alongside them, sensing the inevitable collision of truth and trust, of love and betrayal, of hope and devastation. The air in the apartment, in the city streets, in every quiet shared moment, vibrates with anticipation. The calm of the past acts as a counterpoint to the storm that is steadily building, one small, deliberate, intoxicating and terrifying heartbeat at a time. She stepped closer to him, her hand trembling slightly as it found his. The warmth of his palm was grounding, steadying, as if holding on to him could tether her heart to certainty. The air was rich with the scent of fresh flowers, mingling with the faint trace of his cologne, warm, commanding, impossible to ignore. Music floated through the hall, soft and solemn, carrying the rhythm of celebration, yet in Lila's chest, a peculiar unease began to coil. Everyone around them smiled, clapped, whispered congratulations, but her mind felt strangely detached. She could hear the words, could see the happiness in the faces surrounding her, yet a subtle tension threaded through her awareness. Something small, intangible was off. A glance too quickly averted, a hand held with a hesitation she couldn't place. The world seemed bright and full of joy, yet beneath it, an undercurrent of doubt pressed against her ribs, unrelenting and insistent. Julian's gaze met hers. Calm, unwavering, protective. She felt it sink deep into her chest, a mixture of comfort and something she didn't yet understand, a pull that made her want to lean into him completely, to trust him without question. And she almost did. She almost let go. Almost allowed herself to believe that everything, the laughter, the lights, the warmth surrounding her, was real, permanent, unshakable. The vows began. Words that were meant to bind hearts, to promise forever. She recited them, voice steady though her hands shook, smiling as though certainty lived in every syllable. Friends and family clapped in delight, voices ringing in a chorus of joy. Yet even as she spoke promises she meant, a faint whisper of doubt pricked the edge of her mind. It was subtle. She pushed it away, telling herself it was nerves. But deep down she felt the tension building, a shadow at the periphery of her happiness. And the audience, attuned to the subtle cues, begins to sense it too. The calm is fragile and the storm is close. It came suddenly. A single, sharp revelation that split the world beneath her feet. Words that should have never been spoken in that room, yet they pierced the air with unbearable clarity. Julian was not the man she thought he was. He was her future father-in-law. The room seemed to tilt, the music warping into distant noise, the laughter fading into a hollow echo. Her hands fell to her sides, trembling uncontrollably, the warmth of Julian's presence suddenly suffocating rather than comforting. Eyes widened around her, friends frozen mid-celebration, whispers of disbelief rippling through the crowd like an invisible wave. Her heart hammered in her chest, each beat a thunderclap of confusion and betrayal. How? Why? Her mind spun, grasping at fragments of memory, searching desperately for a clue she might have missed, a hidden warning she could have seen. But there was nothing. Only the truth, unrelenting, crashing down with merciless force. Julian's gaze, once so tender and grounding, felt like a weight pressing against her chest. His hand, once reassuring, now seemed foreign. The warmth that had once promised safety now smoldered with deceit. And in that moment Lila realized the depth of the illusion she had been living in. The love she had clung to, the hope she had nurtured, the trust she had given so freely, it had all been built on a lie. Time seemed to pause. The audience feels it, the silence stretching, pressing against the ribs, suffocating. Her breath caught in her throat. Tears sprang unbidden, blurring her vision. She felt the walls of the hall close in, the faces of friends and family distant, unreal, as if she were watching herself from somewhere else. Every word she had spoken, every vow she had made, now rang hollow, betraying the truth she had never known. and the emotional collapse followed like a tidal wave. Her knees weakened, her chest ached with the sudden, jagged intrusion of heartbreak. The warmth, the safety, the intimacy, they were gone. What remained was a hollow, raw, overwhelming sense of loss. Humiliation prickled at her skin. Betrayal burned like fire in her veins. She wanted to scream, to lash out, to demand answers, yet the words would not form. She could only stand there, trembling, breathless, as the revelation settled in its full weight. The aftermath was brutal. Her world, once structured, once bright with hope, collapsed around her like brittle glass. Trust shattered. Her sense of identity fractured. The certainty she had clung to, the sense of belonging she had nurtured, evaporated in an instant. Every memory with Julian became suspect, every laugh and whispered word recast in the harsh light of betrayal. She wandered through her apartment later, the silence oppressive, the familiar spaces hollowed out by shock. Tears fell freely now, unstoppable, blurring the edges of her reality. She sank onto the couch, clutching her knees to her chest, rocking slightly, and asked herself the question that had no answer. How could I have been so blind? How did I not see this coming? Anger followed swiftly behind the grief. Not loud, explosive anger, but a simmering, internalized fury that twisted in her gut. She wanted to hate Julian. She wanted to scream at him for the betrayal, to demand every ounce of honesty she had been denied. But beneath it, beneath the rage, was a raw, aching heartbreak. The man she had trusted, the warmth she had leaned into, had been a stranger in disguise, and the weight of that realization left her trembling. Her friends tried to console her, but the words felt hollow. The world outside her grief continued its motion, uncaring and relentless, while inside time seemed suspended. She felt untethered, fragile, as though any small breeze could topple her entirely. Each breath was a reminder of the love she had lost, each heartbeat a sharp jab of betrayal. The emotional collapse left her numb and raw simultaneously, and the audiences pulled deeply into her despair, feeling every thrum of pain as if it were their own. When she finally confronted him, the words were slow, deliberate, slicing like a knife through the tension that had built over months. I can't forgive you, she said, her voice breaking, trembling under the weight of heartbreak. She turned, each step away from him heavy, weighted with grief, carrying the echoes of love turned into deception. The room seemed to stretch endlessly behind her as Julian watched, silent, his usual composure shattered, yet unable to bridge the chasm his secret had created. Lila walked through the crowd, past faces that once celebrated her joy, past eyes wide with shock, and every step solidified the emotional isolation that had become her reality. Silence enveloped her like a cloak, each footfall a reminder of the emptiness that now filled the spaces where trust, safety, and hope once lived. The warmth of human connection had been stripped away, leaving her cold and raw, struggling to understand, to forgive, to reconcile the man she loved with the father-in-law he truly was. The pain was total. There was no comfort, no easy explanation, no quick resolution. Only the emptiness, the betrayal, the stark reality that life she had imagined, love she had clung to, and safety she had relied on were all illusions. The audience, immersed in her suffering, feels the heartbreak intimately, the grief, the isolation, the unbearable ache of losing everything she believed in. And as she steps into the night, alone, the air heavy and cool against her skin, Lila becomes a figure of raw vulnerability, heartbreak, and quiet strength. She carries the first fragments of a self that must rebuild itself from the ruins of trust and shattered illusions. The stage is set for the slow, painful process of healing, and the audience is left with the weight of her grief, utterly invested in her journey from devastation toward recovery. Julian's world, once driven by control and carefully calculated gestures, slowed. The fire that had compelled him to manipulate, to orchestrate every step of Lila's life, softened into a quiet, almost painful awareness of his mistakes. For the first time he allowed himself to sit in silence, to feel the emptiness of her absence, to confront the weight of the trust he had broken. The city that had once seemed vibrant, teeming with possibility, now felt muted, almost gray, as though it mourned with him. He stopped trying to anticipate her every move, stopped preemptively smoothing out her world to protect her from discomfort. Instead, he began small acts of humility, helping strangers without expectation, noticing small needs and offering kindness without tying it to his own desires. He respected boundaries even when it stung. He held back when he longed to speak, to explain, to justify, choosing patience over control. And with every restrained action, with every moment he allowed her space, he began to understand the true meaning of love. It was not possession, not protection at the expense of another, but an unwavering respect for the autonomy of the one you cherished. He learned to watch from a distance, to let her exist in a world unshaped by his influence. Each day without manipulation, each act of selfless restraint, carved away layers of arrogance, leaving behind a man who knew the weight of his mistakes, who understood that love demanded patience and humility. The audience feels the quiet tension in him, the ache of longing that he cannot satisfy, the deep, gnawing regret, and the faint hope that if he waited long enough, if he proved himself capable of restraint, there might be a chance to earn her trust again. Even in solitude, Julian's thoughts circled around her, not in schemes or planning but in remembrance. He remembered the light in her eyes when she laughed, the small ways she tilted her head when thinking, the subtle warmth in her hand when it brushed against his. Those memories, once a source of possession, became a silent fuel for reflection, a constant reminder that love required patience, not control. The audience senses the tension, the quiet pull of longing mixed with respect, and feels the slow, deliberate growth of a man transforming from a captor in love to a guardian of trust. Lila's days were a battleground of emotion. Each morning, waking without him felt like a hollow ache, a sharp absence pressing against her chest. Her mind circled memories, some tender, some painful, all irrevocably intertwined with the man who had deceived her. She remembered the warmth of his presence, the comfort of his touch, the laughter that had made her chest light and her heart quicken. And yet she remembered the betrayal, the lies, the sense of being trapped in a life she had never truly chosen. Her heart wavered between longing and caution. She wanted to reach for him, to feel his presence once more, to allow herself to fall into the warmth she once believed safe. And yet each memory of deceit sent a shiver of fear through her, a reminder of how fragile trust could be. Every small victory, the courage to walk past places they had shared without breaking down, the ability to breathe without clinging to his image, was shadowed by the subtle ache of absence, the pull of desire that refused to fade. The healing process was slow, imperfect. She stumbled through moments of hope only to be dragged back by waves of doubt and lingering fear. A quiet evening, a sudden thought of him, a scent in the air that reminded her of shared moments, all could unravel her fragile stability. And yet she clung to the smallest victories. A day spent laughing with friends, a project completed at work, a sunrise she watched alone without reaching for him. Each small triumph was a shard of independence, a reclaiming of the autonomy Julian had once overshadowed with his control. Her inner conflict was a storm without release. She struggled to trust herself, to believe that her instincts were valid, that her judgments were not clouded by longing. She felt the pull of love, the ache of what she had lost, and the shadow of fear that any reconciliation might come at too high a cost. Memories resurfaced, some tender, some cutting, forcing her to weigh the past against the possibility of the future. The audience feels each heartbeat, each tremor of desire, each pang of mistrust, as Lila wrestles with herself in a deeply human, emotionally raw struggle. And in this struggle, the tension of potential reconciliation simmered. She could almost imagine what it would be like to forgive, to tentatively trust again. Yet fear lingered like a shadow, a quiet reminder that mistakes of the past could shape the present if caution was ignored. Every step she took alone, every breath she claimed for herself, was a declaration of strength. Every fleeting thought of him, every lingering ache for his presence, was a reminder that the heart does not easily relinquish what it has loved, even when that love has hurt. The world around her was calm, ordinary, yet each moment carried the weight of possibility. A passing glance, a memory triggered by a familiar scent, a note left by a friend, all were small, almost invisible prompts that tested her resolve. The audience is drawn into her war, witnessing the raw, messy, complicated interplay of hope, fear, longing, and prudence. They feel her tentative steps toward healing, the stumbles, the victories, and the haunting reminder that the man who deceived her still exists in the world she navigates. By the close of this act, Lila has begun to reclaim her sense of self, yet the tension remains, the longing is unresolved, and the possibility of Julian's return hangs in the air like the faint, electric hum of a storm yet to break. Hope threads through the darkness, fragile but undeniable, and the audience is invested, aching alongside her, anticipating the moment when their worlds might collide again, either in cautious reconciliation or final, irrevocable closure. The quiet evening was heavy with anticipation. Lila stood on the balcony of her apartment, the city lights twinkling like distant stars, a soft hum of life below contrasting sharply with the turmoil in her chest. The air was crisp, scented faintly with rain and the first hints of winter. She felt the weight of months pressing down on her, betrayal, heartbreak, longing, and the slow, painstaking progress of her own recovery. And somewhere within that storm of emotion, Julian waited, respecting the distance she had demanded, his presence unseen but felt like a pulse in the night. Her mind replayed everything: the warmth of his hands, the sweetness of his laughter, the ache of loss, and the sting of deception. Every memory was a thread in a complex tapestry of love and pain. She could feel it stretching inside her, threatening to unravel her carefully rebuilt sense of self. Yet the pull toward him remained undeniable, a quiet, persistent hum beneath the fear and the grief. She thought about forgiveness, not as a gift for him but as a choice for herself. Could she trust again? Could she allow herself to love someone whose secrets had cut her so deeply? The answer was not simple. She knew the process would be slow, deliberate, and fraught with hesitation, but in the quiet of that night she realized something vital. Love could no longer be about surrender or control. It had to be free, chosen without coercion, grounded in truth rather than illusion. When she finally turned, she saw him, silent, patient, standing at a respectful distance. His eyes held no pleading, no expectation, only the faintest glimmer of hope, mirrored by the vulnerability she had once adored. Lila stepped closer, heart hammering, breath shallow, feeling the electric tension of possibility. She did not know what the future held. She did not know if the trust she was about to offer would endure. But she understood that the choice was hers and hers alone. And in that moment she made her decision. Not a blind leap, not a hurried reconciliation, but a deliberate, courageous step toward healing and connection. She allowed herself to extend a hand, to offer cautious trust, to signal a willingness to rebuild slowly, deliberately, anchored in the truth they could no longer ignore. The audience feels the tension peak, the uncertainty crackling in the air, the fragile hope shimmering like glass, thin, transparent, yet strong enough to reflect the possibility of a new beginning. Julian's eyes softened as he accepted her gesture, the subtle tremor of relief and restrained joy passing across his face. He understood. This was not surrender. It was trust, measured and deliberate. And in that quiet acceptance, a fragile bridge formed between them, delicate but undeniable, built from patience, humility, and the recognition that love could never thrive on lies. The night deepened, the city lights casting gentle reflections on the glass balcony. Lila and Julian stood together, neither rushing, neither demanding, both breathing in the weight of what had been lost and what could be regained. And in that stillness the narrator's voice lingers, soft but resonant. Love built on lies can break you, but love rebuilt on truth can heal you. The words hang in the air not as a platitude but as a testament to the journey they had endured. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the struggle to reclaim selfhood, and the painstaking, fragile work of choosing trust once more. Every step toward forgiveness, every act of patience, every heartbeat that dared hope again, becomes a part of the tapestry of their renewed connection. And as the story fades, the voice of the narrator gently reminds the listener. Thank you for listening to Anne's Romance Collections. Subscribe for more heart-wrenching, heartwarming romance stories. Stories where love is tested, hearts are shattered, and yet, in the end, healing is possible, if we have the courage to choose it. The night carries the echo of hope and resilience, the lingering ache of past wounds, and the quiet promise of a love rebuilt on honesty and mutual respect. The audience is left with the warmth of emotional closure, a sense of profound empathy for Lila and Julian, and the satisfying knowledge that love, when chosen freely and nurtured carefully, can endure even after the deepest pain.